Hi, I'm Michael Killen. A long, long time ago, in a tent, deep in a desert, a wise man wrote, God created the heavens and the earth. If you believe in the scripture, it's a quick step of logic that you and I are stewards of the creation. And if you have any feel of what is happening in the world today, you realize there is a great threat to the creation. And that threat, an indication of it, is climate change and other developments. Now, I have invited a modern-day wise man who has studied the threat to the creation to come on this program, and I'm going to ask him questions about the threat. I'm going to ask him, what can you and I do to minimize the threat to God's creation or to whatever you believe this environment was created by? He is Dr. Paul R. Ehrlich. He's one of the world's great biologists, ecologists, educators, expert on population explosion. He's written several books and published numerous papers. And he's a nice man.
Great
Paul,
to be here.
Thank you for being here. Let's start right away.
Okay, sure.
You studied the threats to the environment. What are three of the more important threats that are on your mind right now?
Well, the same ones that are on the mind of every scientist who is interested in this. Three things that basically multiply together. One is the size of the human population. We have a lot of talk about greenhouse gases, for example, but when you look at the nonsensical newspapers like the Wall Street Journal, you'll never see them mention that the more people we have, the more greenhouse gases are going to the atmosphere, the quicker we're going to cook our planet. David Brooks wrote a column saying, isn't it wonderful we're going to have another 100 million Americans by 2050. Isn't that great? Actually, hideous disaster. So one thing, population size and growth.
All right, you're the expert, but I believe there's 6.8 billion people in the world.
You're off by about a point billion. We're about 6.9 going quickly to 7.
Okay.
That's all right, because it was at the start of the program. There are many fewer people, you understand. We've been hundreds of people added to the population since we started talking.
So aren't we all getting along nicely, this 6.9 billion
Oh, yeah,
people?
we're getting along wonderfully. There's only 1 billion of us are starving. So what the hell, you know, only 1 in 7 people doesn't get enough to eat. Oh, about half don't live a life that anybody that would get this TV program would trade for. You know, have an income of $2 a day or less. The people are doing fine in Haiti. They're doing wonderful in China. Yeah, right.
Okay, so we have 6.9 billion people, and you're saying we already have too many for what?
Many too many. We can't come close to giving them decent lives the way we run the world. You know?
All right.
We're not doing it.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that. And we're going to have another billion people soon?
Well, if you believe the UN's projections, there'll be about another 2 billion people total on the planet by 2050. Now, of course, that assumes that the death rates don't rise. There's going to be 500 million people in India by 2050, 500 million additional people in India, and they already, 75% of their water is totally contaminated. There's something like 100,000 tons of human feces deposited not in toilets but on the surface of India every day. When you add 50 million more people to that, you add another 100 million people to the super-consuming United States, we'll be very lucky to be able to have 9 billion people alive in 2050. All of my colleagues have serious doubts about it, particularly when we're facing dramatic climate change, the biggest effect of which is likely to be to reduce our food supplies, with 1 billion people already hungry.
So there's 1 billion people already hungry, and we have many, many more people coming. And I heard you say climate change is, the biggest impact is going to be on food supply. And maybe you can give me 3 reasons why it's going to have a great impact on food supply.
Well, Number one, of course, and the most important probably, is that precipitation patterns will change as we change the climate. And we don't know where the direction of changes will be, but we're already seeing the edges of it in more droughts, more floods in places, and so on. Agriculture is absolutely dependent on precipitation, either directly in rain-fed agriculture or perhaps more importantly in irrigation, because about 40% of our food comes from the 17 or 18% of land that's irrigated, which means we've now, if the climatologists like Steve Schneider are correct, and I think they are, we've entrained about 1,000 years already of continuous change in where it rains and where it doesn't. And that is going to mean huge investments, struggles to change our water handling infrastructure. In other words, the dams will be in the wrong places, the pipelines are going to go the wrong direction, and so on. We haven't even begun to think about that. So that's one. Two, guess what? Many people in the world are utterly dependent on snowpacks and glaciers for the water to run their agricultural system.
Like where?
Like California, which is a state in the homeland of the greatest empire that we're trying to maintain. You know, here we are at the end of the American empire, just the same way the Romans are going. Our biggest agricultural state is California. It's utterly dependent for its agriculture on the water that's stored in the snowpack in the Sierra, and it's likely to melt.
So as the temperature increases, the southern parts of the Sierra start to lose their ability to receive snow, hold snow, and then
they can
water.
receive it, but the point is, if they receive it and it melts, then it runs out not in the agricultural growing season, but in the winter. So you don't have any of that for your agriculture. More serious, right now, about 1.6 billion people are dependent on the so-called Himalayan water tower, which is the glaciers and ice of Tibet and places like that, which is the source of most of the rivers of India and southern China. And the same thing can happen there. And then the third thing is that the productivity of our main crops decreases as you increase the temperature. Those people that are dependent on the Himalayan water tower are also dependent on wheat and rice that now is very near the top of its productivity ability. And we've already documented, people have already documented that the rise in productivity of grain has been sloped off by the rise in temperature, and we're not putting anything like the investment we ought to in trying to develop crops that'll do better at higher temperature.
So let me just go back to the water tower in the Himalayas. Because of climate change, the rising temperature, those mountains are not going to hold the ice and the snow until the rivers and the farms in the countries south or east of the Himalayas, Pakistan,
India, southern China,
Bangladesh, and as a result, farm productivity will decrease.
Well, farm productivity is already in trouble in places like India because, among other things, the water tables have been sucked down so low that irrigation in many places is going out. Many Indian farmers are committing suicide, and they're having huge problems with pests because the Green Revolution went in the wrong direction and we have misused pesticides. So a lot of people in the world are going to be in trouble for food, maybe even in the United States. Hard to judge.
Good. It's just staying on the southeast of the world. I think it's the southeast. They have nuclear weapons there, don't they?
Many of them, and in fact, the most recent studies of the ecological effects of nuclear weapons, which the original one was done in the 1980s and showed that if the Russians and the U.S. had an exchange, it would be the end of basically all civilization and most people. But it turns out that even a relatively small nuclear war between India and Pakistan, quite likely in the sense that there are all kinds of people there that are trying to foment it, using firecrackers, that is Hiroshima-sized bombs that are about 15 kilotons, tiny compared to today's intercontinental weapons, that would screw us over totally. Ruin the environment of the planet, and of course, ruin the economy of the planet. After all, if Bangalore alone went away, you wouldn't be able to book any airline flights, you couldn't get any repairs done on anything, and there was a huge chunk of U.S. economy is dependent on people running computers in the center of India.
Okay, you mentioned rice, and rice growing a grain.
It's our most important food.